Said this time, tomorrow's talk, whether you're here or not, has to be seen and heard and understood before you can do Thursday's activity, because it's based on tomorrow's.
And I'll do the same, I'll get it up right now.
Okay, so don't wait a week. Okay. All right, so get you back, and there's a lot of people here yet. Today we just want to kind of start with, this section is the fun section, because it's enrichment, and that's what I do, yay! So, we spend just a couple of slides talking about behavior management, because enrichment is part of behavior management, right? So, Tim Desmond and Gail Lally kind of put together this concept, cue my dear, years and years ago, maybe before some of you were even in business.
1993, presented at
I was there. All right. I was in the business in 93.
Who was what?
Working in a zoo in 93.
Who was born?
Who was born? Oh, yes. Well, they slightly older than my children. Anyway, when I first heard it, I really kind of fell in love with it and shaped on it, adopting it. With some minor modifications. But basically behavior management is a comprehensive approach, and it's all about trying to get to the optimal level of welfare rather than setting a bar and just trying to get to that bar. And the three components are enrichment, training, and problem solving, all of which we both teach at SHIP and many other people. So there's a couple, and the reason why I like giving out the handouts is I don't have to walk you through these quotes. They're just there, they're easy to read. Yeah, and that's it. So on to the fun stuff. An enrichment overview, and this is something that if you've been to the Tuesday workshops or a SHAPE workshop before, you'll recognize a lot of this. You know, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but otherwise the concepts really haven't changed that much over the years. So Margaret is actually going to be giving the bulk of the talk today. I just want to kind of basically do an introduction to what she's going to talk about. This is the book on enrichment. There is not another book on enrichment still, even though this one came out 14 years ago. 15 years ago. We've been working on a second edition for way too long. I don't know when it'll be out. Very briefly, the benefits to doing enrichment are many, many. It's a great management tool, if you don't know that already. I use it, or people I know use it constantly for getting animals to shift, doing introductions, by putting out enrichment to allow them to interact with other things and distract from the other animal that they're meeting, to reduce the stress of husbandry procedures, obviously. And one thing people don't think about very much is to save the wear and tear on the enclosures. For example, see these old muskox? Look at the trees in the enclosure, right? And the only way that doesn't happen to them is if they protect them. Now, for whatever reason, the zoo is willing to sacrifice some of their trees. I mean, this tree is not going to survive in the back there, all right? I don't know why they're willing to sacrifice some of these big, beautiful old trees, but they are. Most places we just do up all the trees. But then what happens to the muskox is we need to mark. Okay, that's a pretty strong behavioral compulsion in these animals, a lot of animals. So you can use enrichment to give them places to mark and save the trees. Okay. And we actually do that a lot. Here to talk more about logistics tools. Correct? Animal welfare we went over last time. Visitor experience, obviously. I remember many, many years ago at a US zoo seeing a pay your extra money and feed the giraffe program, but they weren't just holding up food for the giraffe, they actually were holding up puzzle figures. Okay, and that was really cool. And the giraffes stayed there and worked their tongues and did all these neat things, and the people just thought it was awesome. Okay, so I think that's great. And there's some feeder designs now that. Did you get the picture I sent? Sorry, of the giraffe. Good, okay, I'll try and find it if you didn't get it. But there's some, we just built some last week in Singapore, some really nice acrylic facings where you can see the tongue coming out and doing it. It's great visitor enrichment. And then finally, for conservation programs, whether the animal is being used for a breeder or whether it's the animal that's going to be released itself, you frankly can't do it without enrichment. And I hope by the end of Margaret's talk, you'll understand why I say that. So, what is enrichment? The answer I always get, it's toys and feeders. Okay? And you'd be surprised at the level of experience that I still get that answer. And it is toys and feeders, for sure. But it's not just toys and feeders, it's a lot more. And frankly, it's inseparable from good husbandry at this point. We don't actually like the word enrichment anymore because it implies something extra. Joe Mellon's fond of saying it implies that it's the piece of parsley on your plate at dinner, right? But it's not. It's everything. And it is inseparable from good husbandry. But we're all stuck with the word and we recognize that. So this is the definition we use at SHAPE. It really hasn't changed much since '99 when the AZA working group came up with it. And you don't have to know all that. I can't remember the damn thing. Oh, this is all you need to remember. There's 3 components to it. 1, we're going to make a change to the environment. 2, because of that change, the animal has the opportunity to express behavior. And opportunity is the key word. In this sense, it's a little bit different from training, where we're just putting the opportunity out there and animal can pretty much do whatever they want with it. We have a goal in mind, but we don't have a tightly controlled behavior in mind. Okay? And 3, because of that opportunity, their welfare is enhanced. And we talked last time about how we really can't measure welfare, so how can I say welfare is enhanced? So we kind of think about it as long as you think you didn't go the wrong way on the continuum and you're actually decreasing welfare, then in my opinion, you get to call it enrichment. Okay? But if their welfare goes down, you cannot call it enrichment by definition. And that's a key point. That's why we always start our workshops with welfare counts, as we do. So I just wanted the first one. What do we mean by change to the environment? Well, I think you have to think about what do we mean about environment. And you really have, this is wild condors in the canyon, and think about what their environment is and how we're going to reproduce that in captivity. Okay? And we're not, obviously. But what we do want to do is try and hit on all the key points to them about their environment. And that gets a bit tricky the further we get away from primates, right? Because it's just not natural to us. And being a carnivore guy, I get kind of far away from primates. So,
I'm here to bring us back to
yeah.
primates.
So being somebody who likes to sort of categorize things in my head that works for me, in order to be holistic, to consider all aspects of their captive environment, we started using 4 categories of enrichment, and then the primate people started yelling at me, so now we have 5. We added cognition. And these are the 5 we use. This is the 5 we'll teach in the workshop. This is the 5 we'll work with as we go through our exercises. But I don't care what you use. All I care is that you're being holistic. Okay? You can use 3, you can use 118, whatever you like. All right? These 5 work for us. And as you heard before, our workshop model is whatever works for you. Okay? You have to remember that the animals are aware of things outside their enclosure. Lots of things outside their enclosure. Okay? And in the countries that I typically work in, that actually tends to be frequently more important than what's going on in the enclosure. Okay. All right. Are we good so far? Because Margaret is now going to pick up and spend the rest of the day going through the 5 categories and subcategories.
Talk amongst yourselves for a second.
It will take me a moment to open the PowerPoint.
I was told in one of my classes that even if it induces fear in an animal, it's still considered enrichment. Is that true? Because you said if it makes negative more, or if it makes welfare more negative, then it's not enrichment.
Yes, and does fear make welfare more negative?
Yes.
Really?
No, I guess, yeah, I guess not.
The answer to that is sadly the same answer I have to almost every question you will ask me. It depends. Yes, I think it can be very negative for welfare, especially chronic fear. Okay. But I like roller coaster rides. I like
You know, you said interest and curiosity. root fear, like trying to get over something. Then, you know, an animal that might be afraid of something can approach it and figure it out, and then overcome their fear.
Yeah, and welfare literally changes on a minute-by-minute basis. It's not static, right? And so, again, mostly I work in developing countries, and a lot of the animals we work with are going to be re-released. And so that we're in constant debate over individual welfare during the captive portion versus welfare once they're released and survivability. And so there's often a small sacrifice during captivity in order to enhance their chances for survival and a good quality of life in the wild. So it's almost nothing with welfare is black and white. So, okay, anything else? Do more?
I don't know why.
Wow, that got messed up, didn't it?
Yeah, and I tried to fix it.
Margaret's computer has been having issues all night, which means Margaret's been having issues.
So, like Val said, we use these 5 categories of enrichment. So we're going to go through each one and sort of look at some examples and hopefully, you know, stimulate some great ideas in everybody, because at the end of the workshop, we are going to actually do brainstorming and come up with some real enrichment strategies for specific objectives for animals here in the zoo. So we're just going to be going through each of these categories. We're going to start with social. I do have the crud, so thank you, Jeff, for giving me the throat lozenges. I'll be sucking on throat lozenges and probably hacking a little bit, but I don't think I'm contagious anymore. I'll just stay with my Okay, so all the aspects of social enrichment. You know, we might have animals in any of these sorts of social contexts. There we go. So we certainly want to look at the animal's natural behavior, how would the animal socialize in the wild, and we know that in captivity oftentimes we're not keeping animals in necessarily the same type of social group that they would live in the wild. For example, bears are often solitary in the wild, but very commonly we can house them in social groups. Have any of you heard of using a therapy animal to re-socialize somebody who's socially incompetent? This is something that, remember, I also have worked in the biomedical field and also in sanctuaries, so we may have to rehabilitate animals who aren't necessarily socially competent. They don't know how to socialize and behave normally, so we may be able to use an individual who is, you know, like the perfect auntie or grandma or grandpa or, you know, the fun uncle, whatever it might be, to help that animal who doesn't know how to socialize learn to behave in a more appropriate manner. So that's what I mean by therapy monkey. And with our socialization enrichment objectives, we may have something very specific like decreasing aggression or increasing more natural social behavior. So just sort of keep those sorts of things in mind. I don't know where the display is. I have to start the video. Okay, so I guess first, whoops, back here. All right, I don't know, it's hard to see, but the cockatoos there on the bottom, do they look like they necessarily want to be together? What's difficult to see is that they're actually leg chained. There's a chain around each one's leg, you know, medial towards the other one, so they're inside legs to each other. They're leg chained to the perch. This is not really what we want to do with our social enrichment. We don't want to force animals to be together because we may cause more stress, inescapable stress in this case, which would compromise their welfare, right? Because they have no choice in the matter. They're forced to sit there on a perch together. But we do want to use our enrichment to create opportunities for animals to socialize. So it might be an enrichment device that they all gather around.
Margaret, I ran into a fish guy who told me this was really interesting because they do keep them singly housed, usually in an aquarium. And he said that's because in the wild, we've only ever seen them solitary, so we assume they're solitary species. But this research shows that they're fearful when they're solitary, and they wouldn't approach a novel object, but they will when they're in a group. So they must be one of those species that comes together, you know, and then kind of separates out, and they didn't even know that. So,
Fission, fusion, and race.
yeah, there you go.
And actually, this video is, some of the videos are vowels that she uses quite commonly, and I'm gonna turn over some of the stories to her because she knows the stories better, and this is one of them, because I can't remember what you told me.
This one, you do want the bottom one? Oh, like the almond one. Does anybody know these birds? They're a northern Eurasian sandpiper called a ruff, R-U-F-F. And what you're seeing, the big white feather display, is natural courtship. It's a lek species. And I love this place because they have such a large group and you see all this nice natural lekking behavior. You can click this on if you want. So I really like this example because I don't know the answer, but what do you think would happen if it was one male and one female? Yeah, I suspect you really wouldn't see any of that kind of natural behavior. I don't know.
Okay, so we can have animals in situations where they're with cage mates or with the same species, with conspecifics, sharing the same space. We may also use enrichment to promote social behavior even when animals aren't sharing the same space. So what you see on this side is this tiger has been given an enrichment device. It's actually a burlap sack, isn't it? With some hay and maybe some scents things in it. And this individual, who's clearly not sharing the same space, but was engaged, paying attention to what was going on next door. So even though they weren't together interacting with the enrichment, both animals are achieving kind of different objectives through this one enrichment device, even though they're not sharing the same space. And the other example that looks a little odd, it's actually chimpanzees on either side of the hallway, and this enrichment device can be moved back and forth so the animals can pull it from one side to the other. So they're actually interacting socially. They may have to work together. I'm going to let go of it so you can pull it towards you. I'm going to let go of it so you can pull it back. So rather than creating a situation where they're fighting over something, they can actually come together and work together even though they're not sharing the same space to have some social interactions.
Is that a pole in the middle so the one, they can't both get both of them?
This knot right here,
Down,
these?
in between those two on the rope part?
No, it's
Door crack.
It's just
Oh, right
rope?
here is a door.
No.
Yeah, so it
It's just rope.
can
It's all rope.
slide
That's all rope.
all the
It's
way
all
this
rope.
way. Okay, another example, this was actually at a workshop that we did in Vietnam, China, I don't know, someplace Val and I were together.
Guangzhou.
Okay, and these two animals were living next door to each other. They're both males. They had a high level of aggression, and the objective of the enrichment was to bring them together, have them share a resource where they could both feel safe sharing that resource. They could have some social interaction, but hopefully reduce the aggression because they would come together. And they actually came up to the fence line. It's a piece of bamboo that's been hollowed out, and there's some hay and food treats put in here, and it's tied on with a rope. I don't know if you can see that. So they would both come up and nibble on this, from this enrichment feeder together. Yeah. Aren't they? Water. Ellipsis. Yeah. All right, and then just another device that, again, animals can share. In this case, they are housed together. Okay, so we may have animals that are living with conspecifics or adjacent to conspecifics. But of course, we know that animals in the wild are not only living with their same species, right? They're interacting with lots and lots of other animals. And I think, thankfully, zoos are moving more and more towards mixed species enclosures, which in of itself should provide animals with a more dynamic and interesting life and more aspects of their environment to navigate. So we know that these animals live, or we know that most animals encounter lots of other species in the wild. So how can we look to simulate that in captivity? I don't know if you can see, this is a gorilla with black mangabees. They're not baby gorillas that absorb their tail like a tadpole or anything. They're actually a completely different species. So, and these mangabees are grooming the gorilla. In the center, a hippo, and not baby hippos, they're actually cappies. This was in Brazil. It's on the other side. Colobus and Potus monkey, and the hippo and the glop, I don't know if y'all saw that, it was a big story, I forgot what the baby hippo's name was, but they were out of, like after one of the big storms or something, and these two individuals found each other. And for those of you who aren't working with tortoises, they are actually quite social. All right, Val's daughter Kylie's took this picture, and these animals, the orangutan is being harassed by the Simang. The male Simang would come down and sort of play with the orang's dreadlocks and pull on his hair. You can see the orangs give them a little backhand action there, right? The elephant, that's actually out at paws, and you can see the elephant has a little deer friend that she's hanging out with. So I know you get a lot of animals coming through the zoo. Sometimes maybe we don't want them, but they can provide that little bit of social interaction as long as it's safe for everybody. And then the top picture is a zebra and a ratel, and the ratel is actually a education animal that's taken around the zoo. And so he can sort of be introduced to some other black and white friends, I guess. So just a nice way to provide a little stimulation and social interaction. Prepare yourselves for precious. Tonkin, young Tonkin and rhino. And of course the rhino, is much larger and could hurt the Tonkin, but they seem to have it worked out quite nicely. They do a little bit of play and spar.
I get up an extra hour early every day during this workshop to go watch these guys for an hour before the workshop.
Were they housed together just some of the time?
Nope.
All the time.
The two male Tonkin and the female rhino. And there is a creek in there that you can see in the back of the video that the Tonkins could just hop right in and the rhino can't get in. And in fact, you saw the other Tonkins working in the background, and when these two finished, the rhino looked around and went, okay, I'm gonna play with you now, and started to move to the other one went, and they went, okay, never mind. And then the rhino just walked away. I had the same reaction as all of you when I first saw this, like, ah! But you know what? Maybe we'll read someday what happens, but it's been going on a long time, and it seems to work really well. I swear the Tonkin thinks he's really pushing the rhino back.
I think that the idea behind this is that would you just say, oh, let's put all Asian rhinos and Tonkin together? No, of course not. It's very much an individual-based thing, just like any introduction, that you have to know the individuals and kind of provide the animal that is at greatest risk with an opportunity to escape. But clearly, there's mutual benefit from these interactions.
Where is this? It's in Hungary. When the rhino is sleeping, the Tonkins stand on top of it like it's a rock. It's very sweet, and it's, whatever works, right? But, of course we do want to be careful about creating mixed species enclosures, because if you're familiar with primates, this one is probably quite odd looking to you. It is a sooty mangabey mandrill hybrid that was at the Brookfield Zoo. And so we do want to pay attention to possible, interspecies breeding,
And we also want to be careful of any predator-prey relationships. And I think some of you have seen this video, just another example of two animals, very different species. In this case, they're not actually sharing the same space, but they can interact pretty, full on through and over and around this fencing. And on the top right is a red river hog and a DeBraza, and on the bottom is dear little Ashia and the Diana Shih Tzu. And in some cases, these animals may not always be best friends, but just because we don't see hands-on grooming interaction like we saw with the rhino and the Tonkin doesn't mean that there isn't still benefit from social housing. And I think it's really important with all of our enrichment to keep in mind that just because they're not going crazy like maybe we had hoped doesn't mean that there's not benefit to the individuals, because we don't really know what they're thinking or feeling or experiencing from these changes that we provide to their environment. All right, of course we do have human interaction with the animals, and I think when we decide that this is going to be enriching for the animal, we really want to be careful about that and make sure that we're not threatening the animal by entering its space or pressing ourselves on an animal when they don't want that. And this is different to desensitizing an animal for training purposes. When we're talking about social interaction that's sort of free choice right now. So just keep in mind that that's different than we need to desensitize you so I can give you a shot or whatever it might be. This is one of the coolest things I've seen in a long time. These, what are those, koi, carp, whatever they are, carp, were in this big holding tank, and this one was dubbed Snowflake. And Snowflake would follow people from one porthole to the other, checking you out with my friend Mary and her Detroit accent saying, "Snowflake!" Not that Snowflake could hear it. But when Snowflake would leave to go to the other porthole to follow you, and they weren't being fed by people, they were truly like, "Hey, what are you doing?" checking you out. It wasn't just for food. Oftentimes some of the other fish would come up and have a look when Snowflake wasn't hogging the porthole. Hi, Snowflake. So, of course, in zoos we have visitors that might also provide some interaction for the animals. Sometimes this can be purposeful, like you're about to see these school children interacting with the orca, and this animal's, one of her favorite toys was a hula hoop. And so after some discussion with the trainer and the keeper, a teacher who wanted to provide some enrichment and give her students an opportunity to interact in a safe way with the animal, they decided to have the children hold up the hula hoops, and the whale could come up and sort of check them out and see her favorite toy from a different perspective. And this was evaluated to make sure that the animal wasn't feeling frustrated by not being able to get to that favorite toy. So, we always want to measure everything we're doing and make sure that we are pushing towards that positive welfare spectrum.
Did dolphin care about the hula hoops?
I think the focus was the whale, right, Val?
Yeah, but
and
the
it was
dolphin-
identified as that animal's favorite toy, but of course the dolphins interacting as well.
They all did the same thing that's been interpreted, I'm not a cetacean person, but it's been interpreted for me as being curious, but not in a bad way, curious and relaxed. In the longer version of the video, you can see the three dolphin and the whale all kind of lined up in the same position.
Okay, that being said, I think we do want to make sure that visitor interactions aren't actually contributing either to aggression within a group or undesirable behaviors. And in this case, visitors can purchase food and throw it to the baboons. And you can see this guy's doing flips, trying to get somebody to throw a piece of food. The big male came running in and grabbed the food. So he tries again. So it's like he's doing all the work, and the others come in and grab his food. So we're creating abnormal behavior, this guy doing the flips, potentially setting up some social aggression and undesirable behavior. So I think we just, again, really need to think about everything that we're doing and make sure it is in the animal's best interest. Okay, so we have this other sort of abstract category of social interaction that we can just call other. Things that might be included in other would be a mirror. This monitor is checking himself out in the mirror. Probably doesn't actually know it's himself. Maybe thinks it's another monitor.
If you were to start showing aggression to that reflection, would you then remove it?
Yeah, I think that's, and I'm glad that you brought that up. I have another picture of showing a mirror to a fish, and he's flashing all kinds of colors and displaying and being aggressive. Now, if you can be aggressive and make that other animal go away, that's actually not a bad thing. But if you're to keep that mirror there, and then the animal goes into this sort of hyper-vigilant, I can't get rid of you, nobody's winning, that could be very frustrating and not so good for the animal.
So whenever you start offering mirrors, somebody who can read the animal should always literally be standing there. Frankly, most of the time I just hold it up outside the enclosure. It doesn't have to be inside, just, up against the mesh or across the grotto or whatever. And then when the bear, whoever I'm working with, things start to escalate, you just turn it away. In this case, you can see the runner right in the front, that's a glass window, that would be literally standing right there, so that we can just slide the glass and grab the mirror and close the glass if needed.
All right, so take a look at this. Checking out a boomer ball, pretty standard toy that we give to animals, right? A lot of times we use them to maybe feed in a different way or stimulate curiosity, encourage activity.
Female's the dominant animal. It's her job.
Okay, now watch. You see that head up behavior? Whoa, I won! Okay, so that head up behavior in hoof stock is like, yes, I'm the victor. I won. So then that's how they would interact with another animal. If I was to chase you away, then I would throw my head up because I'm the victorious one. Social? It's a normal social behavior to an object. So this is sort of what we mean by other. And I don't know. This is Val's friend when she's lonely.
My little pig has been retired. That little pig has been around the world I don't know how many times, and I've never met a carnivore that didn't just love it. Of course, it was out in the visitor walkway, right? Never in the enclosure.
He wouldn't have been around the world a few times if he had been in.
No, my kids stopped going to Toy Story with me.
So, can you see the demonic eyes reflected? I don't know. This dog, a friend of mine's, and the dog just kept staring in the fireplace at his eyes being reflected back, and it just looked so demonic. I don't know, social, kind of like a mirror. He was more curious. He didn't seem to be afraid. All right, so we might also have another type of social interaction that we call lookalikes. I don't know if you can read the caption on the bottom there. It's no use. We've just got to get ourselves a real damsel. So the dragon's trying to, I guess, get a prince. A little tasty treat. This is a paper mache baboon that a friend of mine who works down in Mexico made. And she would give it to the other baboons and then they would shred it. I don't think it was actually creating any other aggression in the group. But I don't know what kind of social interaction this is, but that's my sweet old dog that I just lost, and her Spider-Man, which she wasn't really happy about, and my tortoise, who probably thinks it's a big red flower. I just had to throw it in there. To finish up social, does anybody have any questions about social and kind of the different approaches that we can use to providing social enrichment? And I should say, when we go into doing our activity, one of the things that you'll do is, within your group, you're going to have different categories that you may use. You may not be able to use all of them. So it is good to kind of get a breadth of understanding of all of these. Another I failed to mention earlier is these categories are not mutually exclusive. You know, just because it's social doesn't mean it isn't also cognitive, which is our next category we'll talk about. So one enrichment strategy may fall into several categories. So don't worry about, well, I'm confused if it's social or physical or cognitive or whatever it might be. But we do want to kind of, as we're using enrichment, we want to think about, we're trying to use all of the categories over the course of, you know, a month or 6 months or however you might plan your enrichment. All right, so cognitive enrichment is really anything that engages an animal mentally. That can include things like training sessions, problem solving, puzzle feeders, novel experiences, those sorts of things. So, of course, we're not really spending time talking about training, but we know positive reinforcement training should be enriching. It should challenge animals to think, and it should be, in some regard, fun for them. And I think that it's important to take a look at your enrichment if you're using it to check cognitive, done today, I did training, that checks my cognitive enrichment. I would challenge you to step back and think, is this the same thing I do every day? Like the elephants in the chute. They get worked in there quite frequently. It's quite routine. It's probably not particularly cognitively challenging for them. Maybe they're getting social interaction because they're interacting with the people that they like, but the cognitive enrichment part of that is from a training, you know, if you're looking at training as cognitive enrichment, it's really more about the learning and problem solving part of it, not the routine, I do this every day or 4 times a week. Okay, so just think about that. But again, you know, it should be interesting. We're teaching animals to work for a living, and we know that most animals would rather work for their food than just have it dumped in front of them. Oh, I already mentioned that. This is Dern Lemur here, and she's really quite brilliant. She's also highly food motivated, but she is an exceptional lemur, and she seems to really enjoy the opportunity to learn and do new things. And in this case, she was being trained to use that T-stand. So this is, I think, maybe the first time, I think, that it was introduced to her. She learned it in just a matter of a few sessions. She's quite a quick learner, quite a good problem solver, one of those animals that you can actually take fairly big steps with, oftentimes, because she just seems very tolerant and learns very quickly. But I would say she's somebody who really benefits from training and learning new behaviors, from, you know, the cognitive part of that. Like I said, learning itself should be interesting to the animal. In this case, you notice the tube feeder, one end's black, one end's white. This Ray learned quickly, right? In just a few sessions, that the white end had the food. So after a little bit of experimenting, he would immediately go to the white end of the tube feeder. Did I leave anything out of that?
A year later?
A year later, he remembered. So you think that an animal like this doesn't have the capacity to remember how he worked for his food? Well, he proved everybody wrong, because a year later, he still knew to go to the white side.
Even the researchers went away. They didn't offer it again for you. And the first time they offered it, they went to the white side.
That's awesome. I know you've seen this video, but it's so happy. The joy of learning. First time the camel does the 360 turn. Oh my gosh. Too cute. Always have to watch it.
I didn't know camels could do that.
Do the happy dance. Okay, so of course we might engage animals with puzzle feeders, a little ball with the food for the seahorse in it, kind of rolls around in the current a little bit. And this is a tube feeder of sorts that's attached on both ends and used for Babarusa. She has to pick it up and flip it. And this was actually a prototype for an enrichment device that would look like a natural bit, it would look, what am I trying to say? It wouldn't look artificial. So it was going to be a tree root that came down, and so this was just prototyping it. And I'll show you some video of it later. So, puzzle feeders come in lots of different shapes and sizes. We want to make sure that the animal has the opportunity to learn how to use a puzzle feeder, so don't make it too hard at first, and then we might make it harder and harder as they develop those problem-solving skills. The monkey up on your upper right, the monkey turns the ring, and little bits of food, seed, or applesauce or something would stick to the ring. So they have to learn to turn that ring. Down here you see a variety of different types of puzzle feeders. The milk crates with the PVC, of course the animals have to slide the PVC in order to get the food out of it. This one, the cereal feeders, I don't know if you can tell, but there's plain Cheerios on this side and like Fruit Loops on this side, and they have to move the board back and forth. The food drops down and then they have to get it out of the hole. So the idea was to look and see if they would learn to operate one side or the other more to select their preferred foods, which obviously they can see through that clear tube. Oh, why does that picture look so terrible? Anyway, that's a bottle feeder. All right, so popcorn, pretty low calorie, good thing to give to an animal. In this case, the elephant has to reach outside of his enclosure, down into the tube that's several feet long. He's got kind of a fatty trunk, so his trunk only reaches so far down. And when he can't reach the popcorn anymore, he has to try to solve the problem of how to get the popcorn out. So that's the first step, was when he could still reach the popcorn, and now he can no longer reach it. Fortunately, he's a clever lad, keeps working on it. And you notice he could easily pick up the popcorn and start eating it now, but he keeps working for it. So again, animals like to work for their food. They will, I'm sure lots of you have seen when an animal empties an enrichment feeder, they'll leave the food on the ground and then come back to it and continue playing with the device. Okay, so, and I think that I've talked about this in some of the training presentations, but I just wanted to touch on it quickly, that, training really is a part of enrichment. It's also a part of husbandry and management and lots of other things. But for our purposes here today, we want to think about how it facilitates and enhances enrichment. So we like to use these complex feeders, but not all animals are capable of knowing how to use them at first. So this is a termite feeder for chimps. There's some sort of jelly, mustard, salsa, whatever, inside the PVC tubes that can be screwed on to the back of this, so it's on the human side and then protected by that steel cage. and then the chimps have to go and find a stick to dip down in there so that they can get out the whatever it is. But this one group of chimps, they really didn't understand how to use this enrichment device. And this is at MD Anderson Cancer Center, lots and lots of chimpanzees, and everybody except this group of boys everybody else knew how to use this device, and it would engage them for truly hours. And here these poor guys, just because they weren't so bright, were missing out on this amazing enrichment opportunity. So we trained them to dip a stick into a large open container so that they could see what was inside it, and then they learned that, once they dipped the stick, they could eat whatever was inside the container, and then they were able to go on and use this enrichment device without the assistance of a person.
Our chimps love that. And did they not see other chimps doing it?
They weren't gifted. They would rather sit around and go. It was this group of 4 boys. They never learned.
It did work for them, but usually when you do it for the first couple of times, you actually start with the sticks in the tubes, so that when they pull them out, they go, and then they kind of get it, unless you're unless you're special, yes.
So similar idea with the sea lion, he had to learn to pull the PVC tubes from the milk crate so that the fish could come floating out. So he didn't seem to know how to do that when we gave him this enrichment device, and he was getting frustrated. So we actually just took a step back and trained him, this is what you have to do. And then he was able to use it on his own, and it didn't frustrate him once he learned how, but it did extend his feeding time, which was the objective. All right, so novel experiences are cognitive for animals. We want them to be able to think about new things. If you remember, one of the ways of assessing an animal's welfare is how they handle novelty. If they run away terrified and hide in a corner, that animal probably isn't experiencing great welfare. Animals encounter new things in the wild all the time. They have to have the capabilities to face those challenges. So this is a really good way to kind of assess how your animals are doing, if they can handle novelty or if it sends them into the corner, spinning. So if they're terrified of new things, we're not suggesting you throw a whole bunch of new things at them. You want to gradually introduce new things to them. This Babirusa, again, there's still food inside the tube, but she seemed to be in love with it as well. She would just cuddle it. It was real cute. The water buck, the fire hose screening in the back, it was just strung up. Quite a novel thing to him. You can see he's on full alert, checking this thing out. And the otter up top has an ostrich egg for the first time. And I'm going to show you this one video, and I think food's here. Is that right? Okay. So this video is the first time these lions have had a pile of dirt. Did you say something? No? Oh.
She did her.
Yeah, so this is the first time they've had a pile of dirt, and look at him. Yeah, king of the jungle right there. Oh my God, pile of dirt. They're kind of, again, they're doing some interaction, looking at it, checking it out.
But really thinking.
But really thinking about it, yeah.
For 10 minutes.
So what do you think about the animal in the background? Is that animal benefiting from the enrichment? Yeah. Even though there's not direct interaction, they're active, they're sniffing, they're moving around. Now the male gets braver.
He was not brave at all. That's a typical one.
And we see when we give, when we work in these, particularly like Asian or developing countries, and the cats, their big cats really don't have much enrichment at all, and we give them novel things, they're usually pretty scaredy cat of it. But then they get over it. And it's not as though they're cowering in the corner most of the time, but they're not the big bad, lion pouncing on whatever it is. It takes them a while to kind of get brave enough to approach it. Do you want to get some lunch?
Yes.
Yes.
So there's pizza today, and we've got pretty much repeat on the right side and the left side, so we can kind of work two lines.
I almost didn't everything earlier when I was deciding ponytail now.
Yeah, just get food and sit down.
Take it out of the
No, it's dark and then the bright screen. So. Trying to do
Is it an album?
salad. She's so much fun. So she's really. Where is the other I've never had a problem with that.
Everyone, we also have some pasta salad, cheese left over from last night's meeting.
Yeah, so,
I really have no idea.
Whenever
I was like, what video is it like this kid and it was like all this stuff. That's like yeah, it's real nice. We can do it. You want to
Oh, yeah.
Okay, don't mind if we get started. Laura,
All right, feel free to get up and get more food, but we do have a lot of materials to get through, so if you don't mind, I'm gonna keep going. Probably eat a little bit, so, as well, myself. All right, a couple of other problem-solving enrichment opportunities. The dolphins here has to use the stick to pull the nut in close so that you can get that. The anaconda, Val actually reminded me, I didn't even realize this, that this was at a Tuesday workshop we did here in Oakland. The animal picked up that gray garbage can lid in order to get down into the pool. So he or she wanted to get in the pool and had to figure out how to make that happen.
Yep, yeah, it is, or, a few years, when sounds right.
When? Oh yeah, I do remember that. I have no idea what this video is because it's black. It's the, oh yeah, it's the tube. Okay, so in this case, and what I don't know, because again, this is Val's video, there's a little string ball inside the tube. And is there a scent or something else on it? It's just strictly that string.
People are always putting scent on other carnivore enrichment. It's the waste, don't bother. Use the scent separately. Yeah, and they can't get it out because it wouldn't be safe, but they sure tried.
It's a string ball. So you can see they're working pretty hard to try to figure this out.
And when it can't get that cold, they start investigating animals. So not the sharpest tool in the shed compared to a lot of primates, but they're trying.
Okay, but really, speaking of smart, this video is amazing. I know I've never shown it to you. I don't know if you've seen it elsewhere.
Don't play it yet because you really need to explain it first because it goes so fast.
Okay, so there's a hay bag. You know, a lot of times you put hay in a bag, hang it up above the elephants. They have to reach up and stretch and pull the hay out so it extends their foraging time, gets a little muscle, neck muscle, back muscle going. But today the hay bag is hung just a little bit high. But again, we know how brilliant elephants are, so watch her solve the problem.
Can you see the little piece of wood she has? And watch her look up and line it up just right. Just kind of tips her head and looks. Moves it with her trunk. Just checking.
That looks good. Give it a try. Not quite tall enough, needs something a little bigger.
This one she doesn't have to line up because the other one's perfect. She just puts it right on top.
Oh, to be a little taller. All right, gotta get serious now. That is some good hay.
I was gonna say, when's the last time they fed these elephants? What is this?
It's somewhere in Europe, isn't it?
I'm sorry, where? It's
Yeah.
in Germany.
In Germany. Success!
And there's the other two pieces sitting there.
They're clearly too well.
I mean, that is some pretty remarkable problem solving there. And a tenacious gal, I'd say. So for this hyena, the female's dominant. He wants to take his food, which is in the pan.
Just the pan.
Oh, just the pan? He wants to take the pan away so that the female can't get it. So he's trying to figure out how to pick it up. Now you can't see where you're going. Maybe backwards. He's got to tip it down a little, try to see where he's going. What to do?
There's a cave in the back where he can take it and she won't be able to see him in there. And that's where he's trying to get to.
I thought you repelled her with it.
She's like,
He's just proud to have something finally.
this is just not working, so don't stop it.
Can you give those to them so they just
There you go.
The camera's moving so much because I can't stop laughing. I'm sorry to say. Anyway, he does eventually get it back to the cave, and the vet said, "You are never borrowing a stainless steel instrument tray from us again." As he ruined it.
So this was another prototyping for an enrichment feeder that was going to look naturalistic, but we wanted to make sure that it was challenging enough for the Komodos and monitors that it would be ultimately used on. So we were testing this device, and it's a PVC tube that then goes to a narrower PVC tube, so that once he eventually finds out or figures out how to get his nose in it, he can't just shove his whole head straight in. But you can see at this point, he's circling around, investigating it. There's rats inside it. So he's trying to check out and figure out how to get them. And within a matter of a few sessions, he learned how to use the device, and it became really not challenging at all to him. So once the sort of initial, investigation period was over, really within about 3 times of having it. He would walk right out, smell it. And the rats are sewn in with cat gut to a bungee. The idea was he would have to pull at it a little bit, but he had other ideas and there was not much pulling, just a snap and an extraction.
Margaret, where do you get cat guts?
Surgery. Sutures. Don't tell the cats. Yeah, like suture material, cat gut suture material.
Oh, okay.
So that it's natural. Yeah, so there actually, you can also see how it's narrower at the end.
Wait, Margaret, I'm still not asking. So it's not actual cat guts, it's the suture used with cat guts?
They call it
Cat gut
Oh.
suture material, it's a natural suture material, rather than being string or whatever. I think it was made out of yeah, like intestines, tough.
They always work over the head, and I'm not surgery.
Guess that's not a common thing. Y'all don't use that here?
It would seem like it's all people.
Right, so the idea was, because we needed something, the idea was to sew the rats into the device so that he had to kind of pull on them. But he was so strong and he learned so fast that the pulling in that orientation with it on the ground kind of went to the wayside. So we had to go back to the drawing board a little bit and try to make this device more complicated for him because he learned so quickly. In fact, this animal would see me coming across the zoo, not in zoo uniform, and just get, oh, the rat lady's here, the rat lady's here. And he would get all excited and jazzed up because he recognized me because I was standing out collecting data. Komodo.
Margaret, that was something that we discovered with Hogan, our monitor, that he knew the difference between the different trainers. And we had done the classic, underestimating what they're mentally capable of. We didn't know if he really knew the difference between us, and then his reactions to each of us as trainers was so different that now when, because guests will ask you, they'll be like, oh, does the tiger know you? I'm like, well, yeah, the monitor knows me. Yeah. So, yeah. We discovered that recently, and it was kind of that, oh yeah, you thought it was stupid, but he's not.
No, in my experience, lizards are incredibly capable of problem solving and putting 2 and 2 together. Probably doing calculus, but they're not.
I said Hogan didn't like me looking at Target.
Well, I figured out recently that piranhas can count. Cool.
No, I'm serious. Usually animals can only do 0, 1, 2, and more. That's the best they get.
Probably more than 2, I would guess.
Yeah, most birds can only go to 2. Aboriginal societies and humans usually can only go to 2. It's 0, 1, 2, and more for many. So I would be very interested if piranhas can go higher than that. All the piranha species I've ever worked with, I'm sorry, they're leopards in a reptile suit. It's like they behaviorally, and I'm there for a week and they know me by day 2.
So we had to make it harder. So now rather than being on the ground, it's hanging. Rats dangling. And he had to figure out how to get up in it. And this definitely took him much longer to learn. So this seemed to be sort of the golden outcome after several trials. Okay, that's a little bit about cognitive. Let's move on to physical habitat. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to consider as we look at an animal's physical habitat. And of course, knowing the animal's natural history, social behavior, all those sorts of things is important as you begin to plan this type of enrichment. So we want to look at the size, the shape, the complexity of it. You may have a space that can be quite big, but rather empty. So how you fill that space is what we mean by the complexity of it. All right, so furniture and pathways. We want to look at a species, make sure that we're providing species appropriate furniture as well as individual appropriate furniture. seems the plastic chair is plenty appropriate for it's called this monkey. And just remember that the way one animal uses something isn't necessarily how another animal is going to use that exact same device. Notice the squirrel monkey's cruising along the wire of the ladder. And the lemur has in mind a different way to use it and actually uses the rungs of the ladder. Exact same pathway, used very different ways by two different species. And I would say that sometimes we do actually have the best intentions. Sometimes we think natural must be better. When I worked at the Houston Zoo many years ago, we moved the siamangs from their old style tile and bar enclosure where they spent a lot of time brachiating and had a really nice brachiation pattern that they would use in this old enclosure. And we moved them out to the Duck Lake Island where they had this big, beautiful cypress tree. But the cypress tree did not facilitate their mode of locomotion because it was so dense that they couldn't actually, brachiate the way that they were supposed to. And this was actually the subject of my thesis, collecting data on these guys, and we saw their locomotion go way, way down. They ate a few more ducks too. But, so something that may not look as pretty can actually be more functional for an animal. So, I know we want our exhibits to look nice, but I think we also have to take a step back and say, what's going to be the most functional for the animal? All right, so we know variety is really the spice of life. So when we're talking about perching and climbing structures, we want to make sure that there's options for everybody. So the diameter, the texture, how high up these structures are, if they're flexible, if they're stable, do they move. Want to make sure we have multiple pathways if this is an arboreal species, or if you have animals in a mixed species enclosure and they might occupy different levels in the, in the forest. You want to make sure that you've provided pathways for everybody. And of course, geriatric animals and large males might have a different need than smaller animals or whatever. So just think about all the different ways that you can provide pathways, perching, take into account socialization. You don't want to have just one pathway from point A to point B because then the dominant animal could sit and block that. So you want to have ways for the subordinate animals to get around and get to at least mostly desirable locations as well. Oh, I just want to point out the picture on your upper right is texture. This is for a boa? A boa. So you see there's actually a lot of different textures that are provided, and snakes really like different textures. There's rope, there's tube, there's branches, there's leaves, there's mud and dirt. So all different kinds of textures for the animal to feel as he moves around the enclosure. All right, how are we going to place things? We can certainly use enrichment to encourage animals to climb and use more of their space. Again, we want to think about not just the floor and the sides of the space, but we want to think about everything that's in the middle and really designing our perching and props and furnishings within an enclosure to encourage animals to use as much space as possible. So simply by hanging this enrichment device up a little bit higher, the bear has to use some of the perching and props that maybe he wouldn't have climbed on had that enrichment device not been there.
The question that I have, because I see a lot of primate exhibits and stuff, they have a lot of, and our chimp exhibit doesn't have so much, but because my fear, and I don't know if this is whatever, but when they do get into the fight, that they'll get caught up. So finding that balance.
Physically entangled in something.
I think it's too much going on, which is fine for them, but then what about the fighting?
Well, actually Val's going to talk, one of us is going to talk about safety. I think Val sent
I think that's me.
I think it was too. And entanglement is certainly one of the things that you really want to look out for. So if you know that you have, like the chimps, they get in fights, they start running around crazy, you want to, that doesn't mean that you can't have a lot of different pathways, but how you design those may be different because there's this greater risk. So you're not going to have loose ropes and things that could twist and entangle them. So you may want to have more, some more stable pathways, and certainly take that into consideration. So yeah, but that doesn't mean that you can't have them. You just may have a different type.
Thank you.
Where they have to be mounted differently. Like a vertical one that's fixed on the top and the bottom with no slack, they're not going to become entangled, right? It's the slack that's the problem,
Or
right?
something in a PVC pipe, you can put rope in that and attach it so that they can't,
So it doesn't loop back on.
no
Yeah.
loops.
So that's exactly the way to think about it, is how do we get this complex environment that Margaret's talking about with all these different options, and she said it, variety is what you really have to go for, and many of, and how do we get that and still have it be safe? You just need to make sure that every piece you put in there is safe.
So just to sort of touch one more time on elevation, these two pictures that you see are the kookaburra, and this guy likes to take his mouse, it's a dead mouse, but he likes to take his mouse and whack it on the branch. So having a nice stable, and he prefers the lower branch to do this behavior, which is a natural feeding behavior. So they may have perching that's up higher for one purpose, perching, resting, whatever it might be, but then he's got his mouse whacking log that's down a little bit lower. Again, if you have an animal that's older, you still want to provide an elevated platform, so maybe you still have this nice comfy hammock, but instead of being super high up, it's a little bit lower. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. Everybody here is quite sensitive to those sorts of things. We can also think about the benefit of artificial or even dead, sort of dried out, hard, rigid props compared to live branches, which live branches are going to provide a little bit more flexibility. They're green, they bend, instead of I jump on it and it breaks. And I will actually say one sort of tragic story. Potus monkeys do this sentry behavior where they climb up on top of something and look out at everything, and they'll display when they're up there. At the Houston Zoo, the male Potus had a very dry branch that was his highest sentry post, and he would get up on there and display at the public, and he displayed his branch broke because instead of being green and fresh, it was dry and brittle, and it broke, and he actually fell on another branch below, pierced his heart, and died on the spot. I mean, total freak accident, but it's a good thing to think about, when you're thinking about what the animals do, how they use the furnishings in their enclosure, and change it out, because these dry, brittle branches are more likely to break compared to the fresh green ones.
Or if you're growing live stuff for them to use to have that going, then you have to give them other things to destroy.
I think that might fall under active God.
Not a fan of the Potus then.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really freak
If you
thing.
fall and get stabbed in the heart, I mean, come on.
I'm kind of clumsy, I discovered, so I would like to correct that.
Now I gotta go out.
I'm not gonna display it. On a dead branch.
I'm going to use one.
Don't do that.
All right, so I know in the welfare talk, Val introduced this notion of dynamic branching, where the branches all move together, and I think this is something that we can really start looking to use more and more here at the zoo. So just a couple of examples. It's not necessarily just one branch that's a swing, but a whole series of branches that all work together and move together, and they can be really helpful for building an animal's musculature. We were just talking about this with the new, where's Stephanie?
I'm back here.
Oh, hello. We were just talking about this with the new lemurs because they don't have a lot of muscle tone and balance So we want to start off slow. We don't want to start off with every single branch in your enclosure is dynamic and moves all over the place, because they don't know how to use those yet.
Those are, I've never worked with these, this is last week, and this is the very first. They put this up and they left at about 2 in the afternoon, and these are small tooth civets, and they never come out before dark, and this was taken at about 2:30. And they've never had anything move before, there's 6 of them, and the 2 Malagasys on the ground kept trying to get up into it, but they don't do so well at Memorial. It was
Where is it?
in Singapore, in Night Safari.
And again, sort of the same idea. You'll see the whole different set of skills and muscles to be able to jump from a moving branch as well as and successfully land, and also to jump down and hold on to a moving branch.
And I don't know if you can see, but his food is up there on the left, right, just next to that guy's ear. Yeah, there's a rack.
For macaws. And she's actually going to move them so you can see how the whole set moves together.
But we never, you know, literally, when we do this with birds in the enclosure with us, they're like on it before we get the second end up. I mean, they really respond to this, and it's always, anything that moves is always the favorite spot for any bird I've ever put this stuff in. Songbird, macaw, vulture, doesn't matter.
Everybody likes a swing. Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to talk more about how to make these dynamic branches as we go on. But the idea being that mobility can be a really good way to develop physical fitness. And remember, physical fitness is different than having a good body condition. We're talking about good muscle tone, good skeletal development, all of those things. So we need to have this for good physical fitness. So things that move, the snake in the, sorry that one's not color, but it's a snake in a bottle. See his head sticking out there. This is also in Singapore. The orangutans are free range within, you know, they can't go anywhere, but they have quite a large area. There's I think 3 areas for the orangutans, and they've had this for many, many years. And the adult males don't go out in free range within the trees. They'd probably be too small. They would break them. But you can see the big hammock swing platform there that's suspended, so very much a moving platform. Things like wobble boards, the macaque. This is also a forage board. It's got the astroturf in it, so it could be used as a forage board. It could be used as a sensory texture kind of thing, and it's also a physical aspect of the enclosure because the animals might get up on it and the kids would jump back and forth on it like a seesaw kind of thing. Some little hyrax in their swing, in their swinging log.
And that is the preferred place, there's 2 of them. But you can see just by putting the cutout in it and angling it, the public can see them just fine. And this is way above our heads, by the way. Public can see them just fine.
So again, you know, it doesn't always have to look natural, particularly if it's in a back area. It still serves basically the same function. Gotta get coordinated.
Margaret, I want that one for safety.
And the guy testing out the swinging platform was our interpreter with Animals Asia when we did workshops in Vietnam. All right, so we've talked a lot about having places that move and movement, but we also want to make sure that animals have a comfortable resting spot. Maybe the elephant wants to prop his feet up on the fence post. Venturong up there in the little nest, or of course hammocks are a great place to have an animal rest. And again, we want to make sure that we use as much open space as possible. I love this goat platform. This is at the Children's Zoo in the Seoul Zoo in Korea. And I mean, these goats, they rest on it, they play on it, they were, climbing up and down, and they just had a great time on this thing. It was an excellent, excellent structure for those goats. And for animals that are living behind, caging mesh, this is part of their climbing structure as well. So we don't want to avoid using this, assuming that it's strong enough, climbing up and destroying their enclosure. But this can be a really good part of their ability, or giving them the ability to climb and explore more of their territory. And if that means you have to give them a branch to get up there, or if it's like this little raccoon that just goes on up and over, he's getting to use all that space rather than just the ground space. And the picture on the right is actually the vet, and she would have the horticulture department. They left bamboo sticks that they had cut, and she would put the bamboo sticks in the enclosure, and the animals would come and hop on the bamboo stick, and then she could have a nice visual inspection of it. It was fun. It was for primates, right?
Yeah, these were
Capuchins, okay. So she could put that in, and they would enjoy it. They would come and jump on this bouncy thing, and it also allowed her to get a good look at them. And she could do all that from outside the enclosure without necessarily having to have a keeper around. All right, so we do want to thank, where's Colleen? Pinto. For those of you that remember Pinto Bean. So we do want to also think about, what does an animal see within its enclosure? It's like Val said earlier, what happens outside the enclosure is really important to them. So we want to make sure that they can see everything that's going on. I love this picture. This is Prince at Paws. He was in his pool, and I almost had kittens when I saw him doing this, because there's nothing on the other side of that pool. And I was like, there's no way he can get out. There's no way he can get out. But he had his feet all the way up on the wall. And it was a little bit scary, but he had a real nice view of the hills back behind. All right, the climbing structure on your left is for chimpanzees, and this is again at the Seoul Zoo, and you can see how high up they are. This zoo is on, it's on a lot of hills, and the chimps had the most amazing view ever. I mean, they could get, the tower on the left was probably 100 feet tall at least. That thing was so high up, and they could see absolutely everything. And the orangutan is also at the Seoul Zoo, and you can see, he can climb up there and see, get really high up and see everything as well.
Is that rope there or chain? The loopy part?
On the big structure, I think it's rope. I don't remember for sure. I'd have to zoom in on a picture and see.
Either way, I would have concerns.
Yeah. Too loopy.
Yeah. Okay, and this is again at MD Anderson, where there are these series of corrals for the chimpanzees. But what I want you to notice is somebody here, those little black spots are other chimps. And so everybody can get up on top and look and see, hey, what are y'all doing over there? Hello! Or throw something, as chimps might be more inclined to do. But in any case, they do have windows around the bottom, so you can see over here, you can see, they can look out those bars. But this really, by having these climbing structures, and now there's a lot more vertical posts going up, but now they can really get up and look out and see a whole lot more of their world. And I think for a lot of animals, this is really important for them to be able to see. So this is the Detroit Zoo's polar bear enclosure. The polar bear is this little spot right up here. And I'm standing, in the public area taking the picture up like that. So what do you think about this? It's big, gives the animal a really great view of pretty much everything around the zoo. And this is important to polar bears. Think about their natural history. They don't live in a pit. They live on a big open expanse where they can see a long ways. So this is really important to them. You know, I think some animals, they're a lot more uncomfortable when they can't see things. So we really, I think it's really, we need to think about those kinds of things. You know, that being said, we also want them to feel safe. So we may provide refuge or cover or visual screening because sometimes you just got to get away from the other guy, right? Or the public or whatever it might be. So a refuge is typically within the enclosure, and we may have refuges like the culverts here. They could be at different orientations, different heights. They shouldn't have dead ends, particularly for social animals, because you don't want somebody getting trapped, right? But these refuges can provide an escape for an animal from people, and oftentimes when they feel safe, you know, a little shy guy like these Chevretains, okay, I've got this little bit of branch to hide behind, now I feel safer approaching you, rather than just a completely open area where the big human's coming in to poke an orange ball at your face and hope you'll come towards it. So I think you can actually increase the success of your training sessions if you make animals feel safe. And of course, feeling safe is important to their welfare as well. The orange circle here, there's actually an elephant right in there. Okay, so lots of different things can provide animals with a way to feel safe. Plastic cup is a refuge for the frog, but in this case he's choosing to cling to the outside of it. But he can go inside of it and feel a little bit safe if he needs to. Okay, I love the pumpkin with the snake. Kind of creeps me out a little bit. Not having pumpkin pie. All right, so a refuge may be something that you go into, but if camouflage is important, then having an area where you can blend in with your environment really becomes a refuge as well, because some animals may hide, right, by just being camouflage. So there's a flicker right there on that branch, blending in really well with that wooden post. It's a fairly open looking area. You can see it's just like 2x4s and mesh, but this is also actually in the enclosure as well. Okay, so think outside as well as inside the box when it comes to refuges. All right, so we may provide animals with different types of cover, and again, this is typically within the enclosure and allows animals to feel hidden. They might be seen, you know, if you remember the hyrax, there was the little window where they could be seen, but they could also go feel like they were hiding in that log. So for exhibit purposes, we may want to give animals the illusion of not being seen, but really provide the public with a way to still see them. And certainly we know that when we give animals safe places and cover, then they're much more likely to come out. This picture of the lions, I don't know if some of you may have heard me tell this story. This was at the San Antonio Zoo many, many years ago. These lions were confiscated, you know, drug house lions, lived in a basement kind of thing, terrified of open spaces. And so in order to make them feel safe on exhibit, which is kind of an old style carnivore exhibit, lots and lots of branching was piled up. And the minute that they had that cover right outside their den or holding area, then they felt much more comfortable coming out. And I mean, we talked about, you know, we could train them, we could do this or that or the other, but this was really the best solution, and it empowered them to do that themselves rather than us target training them out. So this really put it into an area, you know, a way that they felt safe, and I think that's a much more powerful thing for the animal. Okay, we want to give animals a way to escape from the public, and again, this is that same water buck that the fire hose screening was made as a visual barrier so that he could hide behind it. And here, of course, you know, we see lots of planting in front of enclosures, lots of it around the zoo here. The public has to kind of peek through to see the animal. The animal feels safely hidden. I think it makes it a little bit more interesting for the public because they have to search for the animals a little bit, and certainly it makes the animals feel safer. Our enrichment devices can also be kind of a visual barrier. An animal can hide behind these things. Just some simple burlap sack hung for the hamadryas to break up the enclosure space a little bit so they can feel safe from each other. Val wants to tell a rabbit story. She loves the rabbit story.
Because my name's Bear.
No. So these guys are actually food for the leopards and whatnot, and their open grassy enclosure was for public viewing, right next to the leopard enclosure. But the real problem was that they're rabbits, and especially female rabbits are just pinheads and fight a lot. So we put, among many other things, a whole bunch of these little planks of wood just haphazardly around this big grassy enclosure to break it up visually. And the brown rabbit, right after we went out, that brown rabbit was chasing the gray rabbit, right, aggressively, as they normally do. They came up from out the picture to the upper right, and the gray rabbit hopped over the wood and sat there. And that immediately ended the aggression. And you can see the brown rabbit even came around the end, absolutely knows that rabbit's there, but he just walked away. Okay, it's that one little break to just, end that behavior can really be the end of it. And we saw this several times while we were standing there watching. So something as simple as that can solve the entire problem. So that's what we mean when we talk about topography, having hills or partial barriers like that they can sort of get out of view. Face out of mind?
Outside on mine. So this is just another cool visual barrier, some branches stuck in a log. All right, and we know that 360-degree viewing from the public is bad for animal welfare. So we really want to work to avoid that. And that being said, that doesn't mean that you necessarily want to hang out a shade screen or shade cloth everywhere to screen an animal, because remember, seeing what's out there making the noise is important. It's about having some sort of screening that allows an animal to see out, but also hide and feel safe. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've certainly experienced, particularly in some sanctuaries where they really want to protect the animals, so they put up these visual screens. And I think it makes them feel more anxious because they hear all these noises, they smell things, they know something's going on out there, but they can't see anything. So we don't want to overprotect.
Just an interesting note is that the zebras, they used to like little visual barriers everywhere, and then after they started taking the visual barriers down, and we actually have the now new hyenas, young hyenas, and I've seen both of the zebras literally stand at the fence and watch the hyenas getting their dinner, running up and down the hill, and just watching, just as calm as can be, and actually enjoying the process of watching the knuckleheads.
Now the hyenas are enrichment for them rather than something scary on the other side of a fence.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an awesome example.
It's kind of the same with baboons. Their holding yard has what, maybe this much to where the hyena, and it was really dense back with bamboo, and now it's starting to dry out from the summer, so the baboons were able to see the hyenas, and they'd be like, woo, what the hell? But it was enriching.
Ooh, that's just a little seasonal enrichment for them.
So,
Do the ones that have been there year after year, are they less reactive, or are they baboons so their panties are on fire all the
The
time?
Dean and Violet who've been here forever, nothing bothers them, but Martin's groupie out there, anything. They've seen something 100 times and it's still like, oh, what the hell is that?
so we see this a lot in other countries where we work, where predators and prey species will literally be right next to each other with one mesh between them. And basically, as long as the prey species are able to evade visually the predator, they seem to do pretty well with it. And as long as the predator are properly fed, they seem to do pretty well with it. But if either of those things isn't being done, it could be a really bad welfare situation. Margaret?
I know.
I think it gets, like it fades over time too, like the lions and the camels are right next to each other, and we got the new lion boys. At first the camels were enriching, but eventually they're not enriching anymore because they see them every day.
They know it's not going to be
Yeah.
theirs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so continuing on, I just want to sort of go over the idea of substrates. And again, we want to have variety. So that's really you know, the big issue here, and all different kinds of things to consider when we talk about variety. You can read the different types of substrates. I'm not going to read those to you. You may give something for nesting material and it makes a lovely crown. Animals don't always use things quite the way we want them to. But also don't forget about water. Water is a substrate, and it's different if you have a shower versus if you have a bath.
It's very enriching for the chimps during the summer is mister time. Just having that, the mister on, they just sit there and think, oh, water.
And, well, yeah, and that's accomplishing a couple of different things there, right? Because they can cool themselves, so they have the choice to cool, plus they may like interacting with the water.
Yeah.
So sensory as far as tactile, and then choosing what temperature they want to be in.
Margaret, just as a time check, we have 15 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm trying to hurry along. All right, so this guy's making his own mud. Give a little water, give a little dirt, let the animals do the rest. And I think, again, this is about empowering animals. We don't want to do all the work for them. We want to empower them to interact and have choice and control in their environments. Make choices that give them control. These emu, the red arrow is pointing to a hose. Well, it was. There's a hose coming up right there. This is in Romania, you said?
In November.
So it's chilly. It's misting, it's raining outside, and they're going to their mister and interacting with this mister. All right, just keep in mind, a substrate pile is different than substrate. So the substrate is sort of typically what the animal might live on. That doesn't mean that it can't change, but a pile is obviously, or can be, used in a different way than the substrate the animal lives on.
By the way, the rhino didn't care anything about the food until all 3 piles were completely smashed.
And it is snow. I don't know if you've heard Val say it, but dirt, dirt, dirt. There's nothing better than dirt. And I think in general, piles of stuff are lots of fun for almost anybody. Okay, so thinking about what an animal might need for resting, this is, I don't know if it's clear to you in the back, but it's elephant seals piled out on the beach. So these animals are sleeping, you know, they often sleep in quite close contact. So we want to just understand what the animal's natural behavior is and how can we facilitate that. Do they need a little nest? Do they need an open spot? Do they need to build their own den? Upper left is a den that brown bears built for themselves. On your right, you see nesting material and the result of that nesting material. Lower left, crocodile in a zoo built his own nest. Okay, so we want to give, again, variety. Is there a recurring theme here? Variety. A variety of nesting material, different textures. Make sure an animal can move it from one place to another if they need to. So they can create a nest that's comfortable for them. All right, so getting back to a little bit about what we were talking about with having a choice of climate. You want an animal to be able to choose light, different grades of light, different types of light, shade, temperature, humidity, all of those sorts of things. Electric eel who can choose to be in front of a light or who can retreat to total darkness. When we talk about shade, please remember shade is not shade is not shade. There's dappled or partial shade and full shade. And it's really best to provide all of those options if we can. For animals that live in some sort of cage, you might be able to throw some branches on top, and that's a really easy way to provide a variety of types of shade. Of course, temperature choices, the red arrows are pointing to heaters and hot rocks. If you've got a group of animals, you want to make sure that you have enough heat sources for everybody. And also make sure that if your heat source is up high, an animal can choose to be up close to the heat source, a little bit away from it, or completely away from it. So they can have a variety of temperatures. Okay, this was a little diagram that Val's daughter Aslan made, and just sort of looking at enclosure utilization. You know, you have your typical island, maybe some tufts of stuff in the middle. You could expand the usability by having some more perimeter planting, or again, if you have it completely meshed in, that gives the animal even more usable space. Typically, we want to put an animal on an island because we think it looks prettier. You don't have to look through mesh. But again, we're looking at animal welfare here and really what's going to promote the best animal welfare. And that's often going to be done by giving an animal the most space and the most diverse space. Just as I mean, I know there's not a whole lot of animals that are living maybe behind this type of caging, but if you lived behind vertical bars, with your eyes seeing the way they do, and you move back and forth to try to see your world, what are you seeing? Bars, right? You know, put your hand up like this and whoa, it's a little dizzying. Okay, turn the bars like this, and now you have a much better way to see because I can look through the bars for a long distance. Okay, so just because it's always been done this way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best.
Transport cages.
Transport cages. Okay, so we can create diversity in our enclosures by dividing them up. Only 90 slides to go. Enclosure extensions. I know this is being talked about for California in providing different ways to get animals sort of out of their normal space. This is a design from a laboratory where there's these little pop-outs. And so the monkey, this is for primates, so they can get up into the little pop-out and like look down the hall. And then this design also allows an animal to go outside the scope of its normal enclosure space. So kind of the habit trail thing, a way to give an animal, it's not expanding the enclosure by a huge size, but giving them a really different perspective and way to look at their world. Okay, open enclosures, I'm going to try to blast through some of this. Flexibility of our space, how we can anchor things. All right, I want to try to touch on sensory. All right, so let's think about different sensory things. Actually, Virginia, are you here?
Hello.
Oh, hello. I was thinking about a Shio with this. It's a paint roller. It's a paint roller buddy. So it's got rope arms and legs and a paint roller for tactile. So you have all different kinds of things that you can feel with that.
We put mealworms. I set the paint roller in the mealworm bin and crawl up inside, and then I give it to the baboons and the squirrel monkeys. So we sit there digging.
So just, I mean, that's great. I don't mean to, but in the interest of time, I'm going to just say this really quickly, is for something like this, this truly is a sensory, not a feeding device. So it is very tactile. The animal can feel the different, you know, the paint roller soft and fuzzy, the rope is maybe prickly, the PVC head is smooth and shiny. So this really is about providing the animal the opportunity to feel different things and keeping that separate from a feeding device. So I'm not saying that you can't use a paint roller or something like that as a feeding device, but think about it as a sensory device and how that could be really important, especially to an animal who maybe has the need to groom somebody and doesn't have somebody to groom.
Yeah, so food enrichment tends to be pretty easy to figure out, and they're highly motivated to use it. So when you find that picture, I don't know that example you gave, but that picture, it looks like those animals are quite engaged with that. So if you find a non-food enrichment that is meeting your goals and successful and interesting to the animal, our rule of thumb is don't ever, 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 ever put food anywhere near it. Because you'll suddenly turn it into a feeder, and oftentimes it loses its interest the minute it's empty. It's no longer a sensory device, it's just an empty feeder. Okay? So rule of thumb, find a non-food one that works. When I was doing research on it with our bears, the keepers weren't allowed to put food within a meter, any kind of food within a meter of any non-food enrichment.
No food here. You know, and I think most animals, you know, really like things that move. They also really like things they can destroy. The only thing I'm really going to point out here is this weird little thing on your right. That is a baboon enrichment device, and it's got little wheels, and so the baboons would push it around on the floor. They're in a lab, so the floor is, you know, fairly smooth, but it was a favorite non-food enrichment device that they would just push their little baboon cart around. And, you know, I think most animals also really like something that has a little fight back. So this is you know, the log is in sand and surrounded by tires. He pushes on it, it pushes back at him. And in that same line of thinking, destructible enrichment versus something that is going to last for a long time. Most animals like destructible, right? They like to tear things up. Even if it starts off as you think it's going to be food, it may turn into a destructible enrichment. Palm trees, good to shred, good to drag around.
No food, no scent.
And that's for the most of these, or all of these that we're showing right now are no food, no scent. Everybody's bum itches every now and again. Street sweeper brushes are excellent. The fire hose on your right is simply a piece of fire hose for the elephant to drape over and rub on his back. Another brush. Aww. I don't know if Cisco and his hat counts, but it's real cute. Taking just, you know, our manila sisal rope, wrapping that around a post gives an animal a different texture, something to rub on. Manipulanda, does everybody know that word? Things that you handle and manipulate. All right, manipulanda. Sauter's experiencing his feathers for the first time. Oh, this is the picture of the fish, and he's flashing all those colors, some kind of grouper, I think, flashing all those colors as he looks in the mirror. So again, like Val said, you want to stay with the mirror. You wouldn't want to leave that there. Show it to him and let him chase it away. Let him be the big guy. The monkeys will, you know, in laboratories, monkeys will use mirrors to look down the halls and see what's going on. So mirrors are not only for, you know, checking out yourself, but checking out your neighbor as well. It's kind of a way to, in a sense, expand your enclosure because you can see what's going on elsewhere. All right, lots of different kinds of visual enrichment. In this case, some blue food coloring on the snow, bubbles, painting. Like the idea of giving animals a choice in painting. You know, I think, again, sort of the enrichment value of it is lost when we just train them to paint and make them crank out paintings so that we can sell them in the gift shop. That's not gonna play. That's my cat harassing my babies. All right, don't forget about auditory enrichment. Best if you can give the animal control so they make the sound. You turn on the radio and you walk away, first off, the animal has no control, especially if they can't escape the sound of the radio. They can't change the type of music, they can't change the volume. Maybe they can move away from it, but essentially they have no control over it. In these cases, the animal, these are rattles, by the way. In these cases, the animal can choose to make the noise.
So I like these examples because they're not funny. People don't think about doing auditory enrichment for carnivores and hoofstock, but it really does work.
This was just a chain that was hanging, and she seemed to like to play with the chain, rattle it around. Whoops. Sea lions with a rattle bottle. For South American sea lions, they have funny blunt noses.
The sponges in there are just a color, are just a visual cue. It's actually rocks that make the noise.
Okay, lots of wind chimes. On your left is a wind chime for an elephant, not a wind chime, but a rattle that he can bang around. It's on the outside of the enclosure, so it's easy to detach the pipe that's inside, and there's less risk of him ripping it down and doing bad things with it. All right, again, sounds that animals can make. The reason I have the grate cover there is I knew an animal that used to bang on it, and she would make lots of noise, and that was kind of one of her things to do. She would just make noise when she wanted to. Certainly wasn't an intended enrichment strategy, but it seemed to work for her. Goat feces, always fun. I think you're familiar with lots of different olfactory things. Just, take time to stop and smell the flowers. And then for species that may have sensory capabilities that we don't typically think of, high or low frequencies or electric, a heightened electric sense, then we want to certainly consider those. And feeding enrichment is the last category. And essentially, I think, if you think about presentation, how you give that food, what type of food, is it a variety of food, is there novelty to it, and the frequency with which you're giving those things.
We'll pick it up here tomorrow.
You think we can?
Yep.
Time. All right, so yeah, if you want to take a look at, all of this information is in your handout, but it would be nice to kind of show you some of the videos and slides of the food stuff, and then that'll wrap up the 5 categories. Thank you much for your attention.